Okay, the question is, do I often use metaphors in hypnotherapy? Metaphors were popularized by, I guess we can say they're popularized by Milton Erickson, who was a medical doctor and a hypnotherapist. More so, they were popularized by people who popularized Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson had some degree of fame in the hypnosis world, but certain people like Richard Bandler, for example, really made Milton Erickson even more popular, and he still gets talked about. Milton Erickson still gets talked about more. So Milton Erickson liked to use metaphors, and there's a famous video you can look for on YouTube of Milton Erickson. It's probably on YouTube. Milton Erickson using a metaphor on a lady. Milton Erickson, at the time he became somewhat popular, was he had polio, and he was not able to walk very well, and so we usually see him as an older man who's not able to get around very well, but he uses his words very well, and he uses metaphors. And metaphors are talking about things in a secret way. So, for example, if you want someone to have sexual stamina, and that's what they've come to you for, to have that, well, you might use a metaphor of, you know, a horse running in a field, and the horse continues to run, he's able to run a long distance, and so forth. At no point have you talked about you know, sexual stamina or duration, or used any sexual terminology whatsoever. You've just talked about a horse running in a field. That's a metaphor for sexual stamina. So, you know, really you're talking about what's down here, sexual stamina, and you've used this horse. The story parallels that. It's a parallel of what's going on in reality, what you're really talking about. The horse runs down a field, he comes to hurdles, he jumps over them, and so at no point do you ever tie it in for the client and say, that correlates to your sexual stamina. When you come to a hurdle, you go over, you don't have to spell it out for them, you just tell the story. But it parallels what's going on. And so you use elements in the story, like the horse, to represent things in reality. You know, the horse is coming to an obstacle. The obstacle would represent an obstacle that they're actually facing in reality. So by doing that, you get them there. I don't use metaphors very often because I like the direct approach. I like to be here. I like to just talk about what's going on. If someone's having difficulty with sexual stamina or with anything else, I just like to talk about that in a hypnosis session and say, you know, you're going to increase your sexual stamina, you're going to increase whatever it is you're working on, it's going to get better. I say, why use a metaphor if you can talk directly about it? Because what if they don't put it together? What if they just think you're talking about a horse running through a field? There's no guarantee that they're going to make that connection. It is risky. It sounds nice, and it sounds high level, and it sounds intellectual, and I'll agree to all of that, but ultimately I don't feel that it's going to be necessarily as effective, because you're banking on the person understanding it and picking it apart and putting it, making all the connections, whereas that's not necessarily going to be the case. So I don't use metaphors at all unless I'm in a tricky situation where the main approach isn't working. That's why when I teach metaphors in my hypnotherapy certification programs, or hypnosis certification programs, I should say, I teach that in the advanced class, because the advanced class is designed to clean up things that weren't touched on in the basic class, and they're also designed to deal with more challenging clients. So if something's not working, that's what the advanced class is about. But as a basic approach, as something I would use normally, I just lay it on the line and I say, this is what we're working on, and this is how I'm going to program you, and then I do it that way.